Cynthia made nearly $4 grand in a single fiscal quarter selling tickets to the sanctity of my backyard. Let that sink in for a second. This woman effectively annexed my property, turning my private sanctuary into her own personal splash-for-cash resort while I was grinding away at a 12-hour shift, charging total strangers $90 a head to marinate in the pool I am literally killing myself to pay off. I'm pulling into my driveway after a hellish day auditing safety protocols at a fertilizer plant, my eyes burning from staring at flow charts, only to find my access blocked by a literal convoy of SUVs. 20, maybe 30 people are raging in my backyard like it's spring break in Daytona Beach, and standing there at my wrought iron gate like Cerberus in white linen is Cynthia Sterling, holding a cash box and handing out laminated passes like she's managing a high-end country club instead of trespassing on private land. The scent of coconut oil and cheap Chardonnay hit me before I even killed the engine of my truck, and through the master bedroom window later that night, the shrieking laughter didn't stop until 2 a.m., echoing in the empty halls of the house I fought so hard to keep. Before we get to the nuclear option, and trust me, the fallout was radioactive. You need to understand the stakes here. My name is Arthur Vance. I'm 52, and I work as an industrial chemical safety auditor for Lakeside County. It's not glamorous, but it keeps the lights on and keeps the population from growing extra limbs due to toxic runoff. 18 months ago, my life imploded. A divorce that was less of a separation and more of a demolition derby where my ex-wife took the retirement fund, the dignity, and left me with the mortgage on our house in Whispering Pines Estates. I fought tooth and nail for this house for one specific reason. The pool, because I'm a type 1 diabetic with joint issues, and swimming is the only cardio that doesn't send my blood glucose into a tailspin or wreck my knees. The hum of my insulin pump is my constant soundtrack, and I test the pH of my pool water with the same neurotic precision I use at chemical plants because that water is my therapy, my gym, and the only place I feel human. My twin girls, Lily and Maya, they're 15, they're the reason I wake up in the morning, and our weekends in that pool are the only times I feel like a dad and not just a walking paycheck. Enter Cynthia Sterling, 40-something, married to Richard, a regional hedge fund manager who is permanently on a business trip to avoid his wife, leaving Cynthia with a dangerous surplus of time and a pathological need to dominate our zip code. She appointed herself the Community Aesthetics Liaison for the HOA, a position that exists solely in her imagination, but nobody in Whispering Pines challenges her because she weaponizes bureaucracy like a guided missile, walking around with a tablet and a scowl, treating our subdivision like her personal fiefdom. My house is on a corner lot, secluded, hidden by privacy hedges, the pool only visible if you're practically in orbit or looking from a second-story window, which is why I bought it. The nightmare began on a Sunday in March. I'd taken the girls to visit their grandparents, and when we returned, the backyard looked like a frat house after a keg stand competition, sticky residue on the sandstone pavers, cigarette filters bobbing in the skimmer, the water chemistry so out of whack I had to shock it with enough chlorine to sterilize a hospital ward. I checked my security cam footage, hoping for a raccoon or a storm, but instead, I saw Cynthia directing a catering crew, a literal catering crew, setting up a tiki bar on my deck while I was gone. My blood sugar spiked so hard I had to sit on the bumper of my truck and inject insulin right there, my hands shaking with a mix of hypoglycemia and pure, unadulterated rage. I marched over to Cynthia's door that night, and she answered in a silk kimono, holding a goblet of Merlot. And when I confronted her, she gave me this terrifying, Botox-frozen smile and said, "Oh, Arthur, darling, that was merely a stress test for property utility assessment. Don't worry your little head about it." Monday morning, 7 a.m., the sun isn't even fully up, and Cynthia is banging on my door with a phalanx of 8 people she claims are HOA architectural consultants, though I recognize 3 of them from her Pilates class, and the rest look like they were dressed for a garden party, not an inspection. "Arthur, sweetie," she says, pushing past me before I can even get a word out. "Your aquatic facility requires community oversight to maintain the subdivision's prestige. We can't have substandard amenities dragging down our equity." She walked into my backyard like she held the deed, her consultants spreading out with clipboards. One of them even brought a DSLR camera with a telephoto lens, snapping pictures of my pool liner like it was a crime scene or a spread in a lifestyle magazine. I told her to get off my property. I pulled out my phone to record them, but she just laughed, a hollow sound that made my skin crawl, telling me that community asset evaluation is standard procedure, which I knew was a lie because I've memorized the bylaws. But I had to get to work because, unlike Cynthia, my job involves preventing chemical explosions, so I had to leave 8 strangers lounging by my pool. That evening, the smell of her vanilla perfume was still lingering over the chlorine, so I went into defensive mode, applying the logic of chemical containment to my property line, installing no trespassing signs in 4 languages, plus emojis, because my daughter's said pictures penetrate the skull of an entitled person faster than words. I changed the Wi-Fi password to something unprintable, hoping to cut off the oxygen to her social media addiction, and for a glorious 24 hours, I thought I had won. Silence, no cars, no inspectors. But on Wednesday, my neighbor Sergeant Miller, Rhett, a retired cop who lives 2 doors down, calls me at the plant and says, "Arthur, check the HOA portal, you've got a situation." The complaint was a novella, 3 single-spaced pages claiming my signs were aesthetically violent and created a hostile exclusion zone that threatened the mental well-being of the community. She even circled the emojis in red marker, claiming they were gang signs or occult symbols, suggesting my divorce had made me psychologically unstable. The HOA board, spineless as jellyfish, scheduled an emergency tribunal for Friday, and I realized Cynthia wasn't just using my pool, she was building a narrative to steal it. At the meeting, held in the clubhouse that smelled of stale coffee and despair, Cynthia presented a PowerPoint, clicking through slides of my hostile signage, while wearing a blazer that cost more than my car, trying to paint me as the neighborhood Unabomber. I stood up, channeling every ounce of my regulatory experience, and dropped a binder of OSHA regulations on the table, explaining that those symbols are international safety standards, not threats, and the board tabled the issue. But I saw the look in Cynthia's eyes. She wasn't defeated, she was just pivoting. The following Monday, I came home to find my backyard transformed into a showroom, commercial-grade chaise lounges, umbrellas the size of satellites, and a mini fridge plugged into my outdoor outlet. Cynthia was holding court with 6 friends, sipping margaritas. Sightline evaluation, she chirped when I stormed out there. We need to assess the leisure potential from multiple angles. And then, in a moment that nearly caused me to stroke out, one of her friends handed me a $20 bill and said, "This is for the inconvenience fee," realizing in that moment that they weren't guests, they were paying customers. That night, fueled by adrenaline and rage, I dragged every single piece of furniture to the curb, the sound of aluminum scraping on concrete echoing through the neighborhood like war drums. But the next morning, she was back with bolt cutters, actual heavy-duty bolt cutters, slicing through the chain on my gate, accompanied by a woman she claimed was a hydrotherapy specialist, who was actually just her nail tech dipping acrylics into my water. That was the line. She wasn't just annoying, she was criminal. So I called my buddy Mike, who installs surveillance for high-risk chemical facilities, and we rigged my backyard with a system that would make the CIA jealous. 4K cameras hidden in birdhouses, license plate readers, facial recognition, the works, all feeding to a cloud server she couldn't touch. I watched from my office as the app pinged me constantly. Cynthia with a landscape architect, Cynthia with a feng shui expert, building a dossier of trespassing that was gigabytes thick. But then, 3 weeks into the surveillance, I found the smoking gun, a Facebook page called The Azure Retreat, boasting exclusive private access to a luxury estate pool, with 43 people RSVP'd for Saturday at $75 a head. She was scaling up, turning my home into a commercial enterprise, and I knew that simply catching her wasn't enough. I had to destroy the operation from the inside out. I sat there staring at the screen, doing the mental math that made my stomach churn. $75 a person for 43 people meant Cynthia was projected to rake in over $3,000 in a single afternoon using my water, my electricity, and my property liability. The comments on the event page were a window into madness. People asking if there was towel service, if the estate provided gluten-free snacks, one woman asking if the staff would apply sunscreen for her. Staff? She was calling me staff in my own home. Saturday morning rolled around, and I stationed myself in the kitchen with the blinds drawn and my phone linked to the hidden camera feed, watching as the invasion force arrived. Cars parking 3 blocks deep, because the cul-de-sac couldn't handle the traffic volume of a medium-sized concert. It was a grotesque parade, people hauling coolers and inflatable flamingos down the sidewalk, and there was Cynthia at the gate, wearing a white sundress and a visor that said Event Director, checking names off a clipboard and collecting cash, actually stuffing wads of bills into a metal box like she was running a bake sale for the damned. By noon, the water level in my pool had dropped 6 inches from the displacement of 42 bodies. The pump was making a sound like a dying jet engine, and then, inevitably, gravity and negligence collided. An older woman slipped on the wet coping stones, cracking her head with a sound that I felt in my own teeth. Panic, screaming, blood in the water, the ambulance arrived, and the paramedics had to drain part of the pool to safely extract her. And when they asked me for my insurance info, the reality hit me like a freight train. My homeowner's policy explicitly excludes commercial activity, meaning if that woman sued, I would lose the house, the car, everything. The damage was catastrophic: an $800 pump burnout, cracked tiles, and the humiliation of my ex-wife Sarah calling me that night because she heard through the grapevine that I was running an unsafe aquatic facility. My daughters were being teased at school, told their dad was running a discount water park. I sat in the dark garage, staring at 3 months of evidence, thinking that documentation is great for court, but it doesn't stop the bleeding now. I needed a way to physically stop the incursions without breaking the law myself. That's when Sarah called back, her tone different this time. Arthur, I pulled the permits at the municipal zoning department. There aren't any. She walked me through it, her voice trembling with professional outrage. To run a commercial pool, you need health department certifications, business licenses, liability insurance, parking impact studies, noise variances. Cynthia had none of it. She was operating a black market resort that violated roughly 30 separate city codes, facing potential fines upwards of $30,000. Sarah also dug up the original 2018 HOA bylaws, not the doctored version Cynthia kept quoting, which explicitly stated, "No lot shall be used for commercial purposes, including paid recreational access," meaning Cynthia had zero authority. She was a fraud wrapped in linen. I realized then that I wasn't the victim. I was the hunter, but I needed a weapon that was non-lethal, legal, and absolutely humiliating. I dove into my chemical engineering background, recalling flow pattern tests we do at the plant, and remembered methylene blue, or specifically, a medical-grade derivative used for diagnostic imaging, safe enough to drink, but it stained skin a vibrant, undeniable purple for about 2 weeks. I called my old college friend Dr. Chun, a quality control chemist, and she laughed until she wheezed, telling me exactly how to mix it with a skin-safe polymer adhesive so it wouldn't wash off with just water and soap. I drove to a medical supply warehouse 2 towns over, bought the dye and the polymer, then spent the night modifying my pool's automatic chlorinator to inject the dye mixture on a remote trigger, linking it to the motion sensors I'd bought from Mike. I consulted with Elena Rossi, a shark of a property lawyer, who confirmed that marking trespassers with non-toxic, food-safe dye on private property was legally defensible. "It's like an exploding dye pack in a bank bag," she said. "You have the right to identify intruders." I rallied the troops, getting Sergeant Miller to agree to be a witness, and connecting with a network of 8 other neighbors who had been terrorized by Cynthia's fake fines, creating a coalition of the willing. Cynthia must have sensed the shift in the wind because on Thursday night, at 2:30 a.m., Sergeant Miller calls me. "Wake up. Look at the monitor." I watched in glorious 4K resolution as Cynthia, dressed like a cat burglar in white yoga pants, crept up my driveway with a can of black spray paint, methodically blinding my visible security cameras, completely unaware that the hidden pinhole cameras in the garden gnomes were capturing every pore on her face. The irony was delicious. She was committing vandalism to hide her trespassing, and I had it all, time-stamped and saved to 3 different cloud servers. The escalation hit its peak on Saturday morning when a van marked Lakeside County Health Inspector pulled up. 2 guys in uniforms jumped out, but something was off. Their badges looked laminated at Kinko's, and they didn't have city vehicles. I confronted them at the gate, phone recording, asking for badge numbers and department codes, and they froze, looked at each other, and bolted, leaving Cynthia standing there in the driveway, looking like a villain in a soap opera whose plot had just unraveled. "Impersonating government officials is a federal offense, Cynthia," I told her, and she turned pale, but she didn't stop. She was too deep in the lie, too addicted to the money and the power. The countdown was on. She had another event scheduled for that afternoon, bigger than ever, and I was ready to paint the town, or at least the neighbors, purple. The sun was beating down on Whispering Pines Estates, a perfect 85 degrees, the kind of weather that makes you forget your troubles, unless you're about to trigger a chemical booby trap on 53 unsuspecting trespassers. By 3 p.m., the street looked like the parking lot of a frantic shopping mall on Black Friday. Cars jammed onto lawns, blocking hydrants. An entire convoy of people marching toward my house with the entitlement of conquering kings. I stood at my kitchen window, sipping black coffee to steady my hands, watching the monitors as Cynthia set up her check-in station, complete with a credit card reader attached to her iPad. She was charging $85 a head this time, aiming for a $5,000 payday. But the cherry on top of this disaster Sunday was this special guest she'd hired, a local influencer named Chloe who was live-streaming the event to 15,000 followers, gushing about the exclusive estate vibes and the luxury amenities. At 4:15 p.m., my system alerted me. Motion detected, Zone Alpha. The pool was at max capacity, 53 people splashing, drinking, and ignoring the fact that they were in a stranger's backyard. I watched Cynthia raise a glass of champagne, toasting her own genius, and that's when I tapped the button on my phone labeled Containment Protocol. It took 30 seconds for the solution to cycle through the jets, starting as innocuous swirls of violet that looked like food coloring, but within a minute, the water turned a deep, opaque purple, like grape juice mixed with crude oil. The screaming started slowly, then all at once, as people realized the water wasn't just colored, it was staining them, turning arms, legs, and torsos into the color of a bruised eggplant. Chloe the influencer was panicking, her camera capturing the chaos as people scrambled out of the pool, rubbing their skin, realizing the dye wasn't coming off, while Cynthia stood there, her white dress splattered with purple, looking like a Jackson Pollock painting of a nervous breakdown. That was my cue. I walked out the back door, wearing a crisp button-down and carrying a thick legal binder, flanked by Sergeant Miller in his old police windbreaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I projected my voice like a drill sergeant. I am Arthur Vance, and you are trespassing on private property. The influencer whipped her camera toward me, broadcasting my face to thousands of viewers, asking what I had done to them. What I've done, I said, holding up the health department certification for the dye, is utilize a harmless, food-safe marking agent to identify individuals participating in an illegal commercial operation. Cynthia tried to rush me, shrieking about assault and lawsuits, but I just opened the binder. I have video evidence of you charging admission, I have bank records, and I have confirmation that you have 0 permits. That's when the flashing lights reflected off the purple water. Deputy Kincaid arrived, summoned by Sergeant Miller, and the look on her face when she saw a yard full of purple people was priceless. She bypassed the crowd and went straight to Cynthia, demanding permits. And when Cynthia tried to pull the HOA officer card, I dropped the hammer. Cynthia, the dye lasts 2 weeks. I hope you don't have any board meetings scheduled. The silence was absolute, followed by the metallic click of handcuffs. Cynthia was arrested for criminal trespassing, operating an unlicensed business, and fraud, leaving purple handprints on the squad car window as she was driven away. The aftermath, or Purple Poolgate, as the internet dubbed it, was swift and brutal. Cynthia faced $15,000 in bail. Her husband Richard had to drain their savings to cover the civil settlements because their insurance company laughed in their faces. My lawyer, Elena, secured a permanent restraining order and a judgment that covered every dime of damage plus emotional distress. Cynthia and Richard moved to North Carolina 6 months later, driven out by the shame and the financial ruin, while the neighborhood underwent a renaissance. We formed a legitimate neighborhood watch, fired the old HOA board, and started a legal, voluntary community pool fund where families contribute for maintenance in exchange for scheduled swim times, doing exactly what Cynthia pretended to do, but legally and ethically. I host Safe Swim Sundays now, teaching kids water safety, and my relationship with my daughters has never been stronger. We bond over maintaining the pool that saved us. Justice isn't always about the law. Sometimes it's about chemistry and the willingness to let people show their true colors, even if that color is bright purple. But it makes you wonder, when the system fails to protect your sanctuary, how far is too far to go to take it back? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for the story of how Sergeant Miller dealt with the neighbor who tried to steal his parking spot.